Good morning, everybody. My name is John Hamry. I'm the president here at Csis. We're going to do something new today. We're going to have a conversation with Lyndon Blue, and it's the start of a new series of discussions we want to have with industrialists that are important for our national security. And Lyndon is the CEO for General Atomics Aerospace. General Atomics is bigger than that, but it's most famous and known for having created remotely piloted vehicles. Why don't you just give a thumbnail sketch, Lyndon, of General Atomics and the aerospace division?
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for having me this morning. General Atomics is a privately held company since '86, and in the mid-'90s, the owners of General Atomics became interested in applying new technologies to making unmanned aircraft really viable, and that included satellite communications and satellite navigation, GPS navigation. So they acquired some assets from a company in Southern California, and that company grew into building the predecessors to what we today call Predator, and they became important in the Balkan conflict. The company grew a little bit at that time and had to go from design to manufacture extremely quickly, like it was a 6-month period. And things were sort of tapering off when 9/11 hit. And from 2001, there has been significant growth of the company. And we've now started manufacturing what we call the MQ-9 Reaper and the Army Gray Eagle. And we have short takeoff and landing variants, and we are also involved in the newer Air Force programs that have started last year.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that. Let me just say the reason we wanted to start with General Atomics is that you kind of created a whole new mission field for the Defense Department. I mean, unmanned vehicles, they were dabbled with things before, but it was really your energy that kind of made it a main mission. So first of all, let's just talk about the Ukraine war, because if ever there's a defining new part of warfare, it's the way that unmanned vehicles have become such a big element of this Ukraine war. Can you just give us your thoughts about what you're seeing and how you think this is changing the nature of warfare?
Certainly, from a distance, which is our perspective, I think what we learn, what we take away from the last 3 years of conflict now, is the lack of significant air dominance and really a lack of air power on both sides. And that has led to a large area along the front of conflict which is denied to most aircraft. And this proliferation of smaller drones, and both quadcopter type drones and fixed wing type drones. And I think that the reason why those are the only things that are really viable at the moment is because any kind of sort of more conventional aircraft is prevented from getting into that contested area or getting very close to it by the integrated air defense system that is based on the original Soviet designs. And as long as that integrated air defense system is working, then you have this sort of stalemate that exists today that's dominated by primarily small drones. I think that a learning is that you have to figure out a way to go after the integrated air defense system so that you can break open this absolute exclusion of air power that we see on the front today. And I think going after that system is a combination of integrating the small drones with larger aircraft that can deliver them efficiently, that can do long-range sensing, and also integration with the fighter force that's growing in Ukraine now. Without taking down that IAD system, you're going to be probably stuck in this present situation for, unfortunately, a long time.
But it seems it seems to have created a whole new modality of warfare. I mean, you say you framed it as being a necessity because of the air defense environment, but it really has created something profoundly new, isn't it? And how do you see that? I mean, you've been in the unmanned vehicle business longer than anybody.
Yeah, I think what you see is in that level of contested environment, you do have to rely on smaller vehicles that are cheaper, and therefore you can lose a lot of them, and that's what happens. Mm-hmm. You have to worry a lot about electronic warfare resilience, both the data links and the navigation systems. And it's certainly not going to ever go away that ground force is going to be dependent on these small drones. But it's also a situation where there's a quasi-stalemate because air power can't be brought to bear. So I think this new discovery of very resilient small aircraft and attritable aircraft is for the learning that we take away from it is that we're going to have to combine it somehow with a resilient air power that can operate from standoff, but that can address this air defense system, which is keeping everything else out today.
Can you share with us a little bit what is the mission planning side that goes with unmanned vehicles? This is something that we just see the boom, but there's a tremendous amount of mission planning and control that's behind it. Could you just describe that?
Yes, it can be a very complex system. I think in general, planning aircraft missions has been a sort of an archaic system, which takes a long time for ground force commanders, for example, to ask for support, and larger headquarters taking quite a long time to plan that support, and reducing the time it takes to coordinate ground and air forces has been a focus, I think, the last 20 years. The benefit of having long endurance unmanned aircraft is that you can retask them organically. You can retask them after they've taken off. You can retask them at any time during their 20 or 30-hour mission. You can also change the mission plan based on sensor feeds that you get off of these aircraft in real time, as opposed to waiting till they land and analyzing them and then figuring out 2 days later what you're going to do about it. So there's a lot of software development now that's going into making the mission planning more efficient and integrating the mission planning with what's going on in the rest of the operating theater.
A young man who was my personal assistant he became a Marine, and he was in Afghanistan, and he said, I just loved the Predators because I had control of that for 3 hours, 4 hours. He said, I could get an F-18 for 30 minutes, but I had this longevity. The ground guys really came to admire unmanned vehicles in the Ukraine war, in the Afghanistan war. Yes. But this is a different kind of a war. I mean, this is a more sophisticated use of unmanned vehicles that you've pioneered. And so let me ask, I mean, the Defense Department is exploring ideas of kind of hybrid manned, unmanned resources, in combination, in, tandem. What is that like? How do you look at that mission issue?
Well, over the last decade plus, there's been lots of manned-unmanned teaming in a sort of a more primitive sense, in that the unmanned aircraft, which had the endurance to select the target, when finally the target would appear, the unmanned aircraft would laze for maybe another aircraft that would deliver a weapon. That was a very common thing to buddy laze for, and still is, to buddy laze for a manned platform, for example, sometimes even another unmanned platform. Manned-unmanned teaming is going to now spread beyond that sort of classical buddy lazing, and you find it in the maritime surveillance area where you have manned patrol aircraft that don't have the endurance of the unmanned aircraft. But if you do find a vessel of some kind that requires further prosecution or requires lots and lots of sonobuoys, then that unmanned aircraft that has found the target can then bring in the manned patrol aircraft. It's also becoming more of a strategy, or more of a tactic for the unmanned aircraft to provide in the future in-flight targeting updates to weapons that are delivered from way far away, meaning they're delivered from a manned platform, for example, that does not see the target and maybe doesn't exactly know where the target is. So while that weapon is flying, the manned crew is not in danger of getting too close, and the targeting updates are provided by a long-endurance unmanned aircraft. Mm-hmm. So those are examples of where the mission space is going, and where it has been.
Do you see this? Do you see the services having a stronger commitment now to unmanned vehicles? I mean, there's been a battle for 20 years to get a focus on it. Do you see that? Have we finally broken through, to an understanding of the crucial role that unmanned vehicles are going to play?
I think I don't know that we've broken through necessarily. I think we've certainly evolved to where their acceptance is greater, that unmanned is critical for operational reasons, not because it's unmanned. And also unmanned doesn't mean that there are no people involved. That's been another issue which needs to be addressed and can be addressed. But different services have absorbed or accepted the role of unmanned aircraft systems in different ways. And I think going into the Army, for example, you have a helicopter-focused culture. And I think that the aviation part of the Army is its own community, and they have embraced the unmanned system. I think that, for example, in the Army, the appreciation for the unmanned system broadly in communities outside aviation, that takes more time. So that would be an example of how it's a slow and successive process. It's a changing of cultures that takes years. Now, maybe the conflicts of today, as you said before, will force that to come quicker.
Yeah.
And force the evolution of the unmanned systems so that they address today's problems.
Yeah, I remember when the Army had the Aquila. This was 35 years ago.
Yes.
And it was a failure.
Yes. If you look that far back, from my perspective, what made General Atomics aeronautical is taking the new technologies of that time, making them work very reliably, building airplanes. First, you have to designing airplanes that can be built very, very reliably, that can be sustained fairly easily and sustained across the world, not just in your backyard. And so that really requires some very, very significant engineering prowess. You've got to be able to build something and sustain it and have it be available 90% of the time. And not just the aircraft be available, but the entire system. That means the communication systems, the payloads, in some cases the weapons. Everything has to be ready when you need it. And that, I think, is the tough part for competitors.
You just entered into an agreement with a company that does additive manufacturing for vehicles. What is that going to do?
Well, additive is certainly a revolution in manufacturing. It will enable you to design parts more quickly, and it will reduce, in many cases, the amount of touch labor that's required, especially with composites. So I think both on the design engineering and on production, additive manufacturing will make everything faster. What is a limitation that needs to be overcome, and this will happen over time, is to structurally qualify parts that are additively manufactured for airworthiness. And the other limitation that also is changing over time is how big of a part you can make with those machines.
How forward-leaning are DoD acquisition authorities for additive manufacturing? Are they skeptical about the airworthiness issues, or are they leaning forward? How would you characterize, the openness to something really quite new? I remember when we had composites first came in, and that was controversial.
Yeah, I think that our approach, at least up until now, has been to bring in these parts and start with parts that are not the most critical for airworthiness, that are not load-bearing and structural parts. So I think the acceptance so far has been pretty positive, but we've also gone about it in a very deliberate manner, understanding what the airworthiness requirements are, and those for military customers are to a large extent driven by those customers directly.
That's interesting. Let me ask, there was 40 years ago we were trying to prevent the spread of Scud technology, and we entered into a treaty arrangement, the Missile Technology Control Regime, which was designed for missiles, but it's been extended, I believe, to unmanned vehicles. Is that right?
Yes.
And what does that mean for you?
Well, the Missile Technology Control Regime, the MTCR, has been something that certainly has hamstrung, I think, the American export industry in the unmanned aircraft area, because UAVs were considered cruise missiles, which they're not. These policy decisions over the years have been have generally been restrictive, and you have cases where countries that were not members of the regime were therefore not allowed to acquire our systems. which took a long, long time. Now things have certainly improved, but we still have that understanding out there that we are considered to be cruise missiles, and so it still isn't dead that exports are going to be slowed down by this idea that, well, the customer isn't a member, and they have to therefore either become a member or they have to show that they're going to act like a member, which is kind of difficult to do. That has certainly slowed down the growth of the business, and certainly also ceded American market space to other international competitors.
But here we've got the Iranians selling the Shahed missiles. These are, if ever there was something that you would think would be controlled, it would be that, and yet it doesn't impede that. I mean, it just strikes me that it's the good guys that are paying attention to the...
Yeah, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot sometimes. You have, certainly the Iranians are out there. The other leading competitors would be Turkey, China, and in some places Israel.
Yeah. So let me, if I could, shift over and ask you to share your ideas you're a businessman. You have to make a profit. You may be a private corporation, but it's the same dynamic. And yet you have to do business with an irritating customer. That was my word. That wasn't yours.
No. We love our customers.
I know you love your customer, but it's challenging. I mean, how well does the government understand the business side of defense acquisition? Not just placing an order for Predators from you, but really understanding the business dynamics that you have to accommodate.
Well, I have a feeling that it's not the foremost thing in let's say in the mind of the acquisition corps or even in the mind of the users. What a business has to do to survive and to thrive and to be able to invest and to be able to grow, to be able to maintain the best people, which is really the key. There's probably not that much understanding of that. There's the idea that you do have to have banks finance your working capital, even if you're not growing. And if you are growing, then you need to finance investment. If you are going to do something like go into the leasing business in an area like unmanned aircraft, that is very capital intensive, because there are no aircraft leasing companies out there that will buy an MQ-9, not today. So those kinds of demands, I think, are not so well understood now that interest rates are much higher. That the fact that you now are eating away at your EBIT by paying way higher interest is that's really not so interesting. In government accounting, interest is not even considered to be a allowable cost. So I think those are not generally well understood.
Cost of capital is not considered to be an allowable cost.
Interest is not an allowable cost. I would say that's the rule. I'm not an accounting expert, but that's certainly I know. Yeah. So interest is definitely not allowable. I think that there is a perception always on the government side that the contractors are just out there trying to make more money, and I think it's not universal, but that sort of never goes away completely. And so the idea that the contractor is really trying to figure out how he can or she can best address the user's needs on the government side, and I think that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle.
Do we still have a lowest cost compliant kind of a culture still dominating the acquisition core?
Oh, I think in some cases that still exists, but my perception is it's not a general issue. There is the question now, maybe more recently, of new companies that haven't been in the defense business that should compete for defense contracts based on commercial proposals and commercial contracts. That's becoming sort of a new issue.
Yeah, expand on that. I wanted to ask you.
So there the issue is, if you in the defense community, in the defense industry, traditionally you've had to comply with government accounting standards, whether you're doing cost plus or fixed price contracts. Even fixed price contracts, which are more than half of what we do, are based on cost and pricing data, which has to be qualified, which the government has full insight into. But so it's not all about cost plus. Cost plus is something you generally would see for development. For manufacturing, you generally would see a firm fixed price. But beyond that, if you say, well, we're not going to use that at all. We're just going to have a commercial fixed price, and whoever wins based on that price will win. Period. No matter what happens. I think number one, you would say that's okay. That's okay as long as everybody has the same treatment. If one company has to abide by the FAR and the other company doesn't because they're new and they don't have a qualified accounting system, then that's how can the government make a apples to apples decision on those two proposals, because they're completely different. So at least I think it's what's reasonable is for any bidder to be handled the same way, whether he's traditional or not. Now, the risk, of course, the government's risk, if it does go for a commercial fixed price on a development contract, for example, is that some companies have the financial wherewithal to literally buy a development contract, and that happens.
It does, yeah.
It does happen. And the reason they do that is because they know that now that they are the bespoke supplier, when they get to the manufacturing contract, they can make their money back. And that's been...
Well, historically, that was a pattern. We expected companies to subsidize the development, and then they could make their money back. But
right. So the influence that the government will have in the execution of that kind of a program will be limited by that factor. So the reason that you have a FAR, which I think I don't like government accounting either, and I think it causes a lot of unnecessary overhead. But the reason you have a FAR is because the government has decided that when they're going to develop something that's bespoke to defense, they will share some of the risk of that. And that's why these cost plus systems exist. There is some logic to them, although I would agree that the overhead costs that are created by
the transactional costs are astounding.
They are more than really strictly is necessary, in my opinion.
I mean, I'd have to go back 30 years, but when I was doing some of this stuff, overhead cost was running 40%.
It can do that.
It was astounding what was required. Now, very important for our audience to understand that you've just talked about a very profoundly important thing, which is in the commercial world, it's all about price. You develop a product, you try to figure out, can I sell it for that? Will it clear? How do I then lower my costs to get larger margins? In the world of government, it's all about cost. What does it cost? And the theory was clear, which is the government could borrow money less expensively than could a private company. That's why they won't allow interest. But then you put you into this cost compliance environment and into a cost accounting environment, which has, we don't really value the expense of all of that, but it's there.
Absolutely, yes. It does make these does make the defense products more expensive.
Yeah. Right now, Doge is becoming a four-letter word in Washington, but I think there's a lot of people interested in how can we make government more efficient. You're a businessman that sells one of the best products in the world, for unmanned vehicles. What are ideas that you would bring to help reform how we buy things and get better value for money?
Okay, well, I think that the biggest bang for the buck is in acquisition reform is to for the government to reevaluate its risk acceptance. And what I think I suffer from the most as I watch the execution of not all but many defense programs is the enormous burden of process, the sort of heel to toe strategy of executing different parts of the qualification process of a newly developed defense product that drags it out 3 or 4 times longer than it needs to be. And when you drag things out in schedule, you will pay for that with dollars. I think there are vehicles to do that. There are what we call other government authorities. There's the middle tier acquisition, which reduces that burden of the oversight, reduces the burden of some of the burden of the process. But I think there's not an incentive right now for most people in the military acquisition corps to use those vehicles a lot because they increase risk and they're not rewarded if something goes wrong. They're not rewarded. They're career-wise, maybe they have no incentive to do that.
Yeah.
So it's not done as much as it could be, and so that's why you've got very, very slow programs. You've got programs that go on for years and years and years between the definition of the requirement and initial operational capability can be over a decade, sometimes close to 2. And I think the biggest thing you could do is shrink that time between requirements definition and operational capability.
But it does get to your point. We have to change how we accept risk.
Yes.
I mean, 50 years ago, 80 years ago, when we were experimenting with airplanes, we accepted a lot of risk.
Yes.
And we built a lot of prototypes.
Yes.
We don't seem to tolerate any risk now.
Yes, the pendulum certainly swung way to the other side. And you probably can't crash. You don't want to crash things the way maybe the 100 series fighters crashed, obviously. By the way, now unmanned aircraft, at least you don't have to lose the pilot. But more acceptance of risk, and I don't think crashing is anecdotal. We don't want to crash airplanes, but
right.
But I think that there needs to be more acceptance of risk, and it's gone to an extreme now, which is not competitive with the other powers in the world that we're worried about.
Right.
It's not. It's definitely not.
Right. Do you? I mean, it's hard to change a culture that is so risk averse because the Congress is going to kill you if it sees it's an opportunity to score a coup. And so it seems to me that's more than anything is impeding us, because there's a fear that Congress is going to react very negatively. So there's this real deep culture that I don't know if it's fixable at this stage.
Well, I do have an optimistic view that is being recognized. It's certainly not recognized across the board. I think that the new Air Force program, which is related to the collaborative combat aircraft, is trying to take a different approach. I think it's really important for the success of that program to keep that approach and to not slide back into the legacy way of performing.
Yeah.
Which will drag the thing out till kingdom come, possibly. And I think so. There are pockets right now it's pockets in OSD or in DoD that have recognized this and are really trying very hard to take a different approach and have top cover to do it. If you don't have the top cover, these guys are not going to.
Exactly
no
right.
one's going to do it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And unfortunately, because the average political appointee serves 26 months, they're not, the people that'll make a decision aren't going to be there, and I think the bureaucracy feels vulnerable.
Yes, that's certainly one of the causes. Yes.
Yeah, we're going to have to work on it. Let me ask about surge capacity. This is Dr. Seth Jones did some very important work a year ago on what we called empty bins, that we were not buying enough, basically for war plans. We'd given a lot to the Ukrainians. I strongly support that, but we had empty bins. And so we started studying it. There's very little surge capacity in our system. Why?
Well, I think for industry to have surge capacity, industry does have some surge capacity, but for it to have the surge capacity that we need today, it does have to see demand signal. And then when it does see that, then you do have generally tooling that you have to build. You have people that you have to bring back, and they're not just any people. The labor market is been tight for a long time, and it's still tight for highly skilled technical labor and engineering labor. So all those things will make the building up of surge capacity take some time. But what I think is more important, and that's maybe being lost in this, when people ask this question, is industry can ramp up, and it can ramp up quick, and there are historical precedents for very quick ramping up. But I think even there, when you have an acquisition system that requires you're only allowed to use one tooling supplier because only one tooling supplier is qualified, and to requalify another tooling supplier, which requires government requalification, will take 6 to 8 months if you can get the resources to do it. Those kinds of process issues, which we just finished talking about on the previous topic, are going to slow down your ability to create that surge capacity. The surge capacity doesn't fall out of the sky, but creating it quickly means also, if you're constrained by lots and lots of process requirements, then it's going to take you forever to build it up, and that's one of the reasons why manufacturing capacity for all kinds of articles that we have realized we don't have enough of is taking so long.
But for 20 years, I think the acquisition community said, we don't want to pay for excess tooling. We don't want to pay for an unused factory. We don't want to pay for, the working capital associated with having material on supply.
Well, that's true. That's true.
And so all of a sudden, if you're not prepared to pay for it, you can't have it.
That's right.
The business community isn't going to do it.
That's absolutely true. And I think there was the acquisition community. It was Congress probably. That's
a little bit of both. I mean, yes. I think the services want to maximize how many things they can buy every year, and so they don't want to spend it on surge capacity because that doesn't give them extra kit, and they're looking for that. So unfortunately, we've talked ourselves into a box.
Yeah. Yes. There is the other factor is that the acquisition community correctly considers is, if I buy a bunch of stuff, if I have a bunch of stuff, what people do I have to use it, and are these people trained? And so all those considerations, I think, make it difficult to plan surge capacity. Can
you share with us what are the constraints at the second and third tier suppliers? Because what I hear is that's where the real bottlenecks are. You said that you don't qualify a second company, but do we really have these companies available, or we have to build them?
In some cases, we have to build them. I think it depends on what kind of equipment you're trying to build. There is generally a good enough industrial base in the U.S. to grow your number of suppliers, but it takes a lot of focus and time and money for them to be qualified. And it's not just your money as in our case an OEM, but they also have to invest on their end, and sometimes they're not willing to, in which case they expect you to do it, and that's an added burden.
Well, and how many companies want to put up with mil-spec?
Well, that's another issue. If you got to have suppliers that have qualified accounting systems, then that's a real problem. Particularly as you go further down in the tiers of the suppliers. Mm-hmm. So smaller companies cannot afford to assume that burden, and they'll just say no, thank you. You got to go find somebody else. We're not doing that. Yeah. You either buy from us at the price that we gave you, or we're sorry.
Take it or leave it.
Yeah, we just can't do it. We gotta.
Yeah. And do you think the acquisition community understands that? Or do they just say, we're paying them, they'll do it?
Well, I'm sure they understand it. I think there are varying degrees of people in the acquisition community that say, well, yeah, so it's a problem, but it's your problem. Go mm-hmm. figure it out. Mm-hmm. I can't push the responsibility entirely on the acquisition community. They have their job and so on, and I think most of them do understand
they live in a political environment, and they get killed if some little horror story pops up. I remember that when I was in government.
Yes. I think again, if there's top cover, you can simplify some of these requirements, waive mm-hmm. some of the requirements, especially if you're trying to build up surge capacity quickly. You're going to have to take on some risk. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you're going to have somebody high up say, it's okay, take the risk.
Yeah.
And if something goes wrong,
I'm here. Mm-hmm. Completely understand. We've got just a few minutes left. Linda, let me ask you to look out into the future. You've been a pioneering company. You've developed a product that's now becoming seen as the future for all of aviation. What do you think it's going to be like? And have we built our last manned airplane? Designed, I should say, our last manned aircraft?
Well, certainly passenger aircraft are going to be manned for, I think, a long time. Not forever, but a long time. I think more and more military aircraft that have a role, especially an ISR role, will probably become unmanned, because in ISR you generally value endurance, and with endurance, if you really want endurance, it's better to go unmanned. Mm-hmm. Now that we can get data off of aircraft, which is a new thing, and get lots and lots of data off of aircraft, you also don't have the requirement to put bodies into the fuselage to do that work in the fuselage. And now you can do it. You can do it with the computer. You can bring the information to the ground where you ultimately need it, and you can spread it out from there. That's a new thing. So I think that's going to push unmanned aircraft to take over more roles than we know from the last 20 years in reconnaissance and in surveillance, and that means particularly maritime patrol, means standoff electronic warfare, where unmanned aircraft are up there all the time, developing and updating the electronic order of battle. And I think a newer area that's going to happen too is airborne early warning, which right now is the domain of manned aircraft, but that's because of
AWACS.
Because of the nature of the payloads, and as those payloads become advance with technology, I think they will be, even those payloads will be applicable to long endurance unmanned aircraft. On the air-to-air side, I think we're seeing that now, that affordable mass is not possible at the price range of manned fighter aircraft. Now, manned fighter, we have a good, in the United States, we have decent mass of manned aircraft, but I think the recognition is that's not enough to do the job that those potential competitors in the world right now would make us do. So we need more mass, and more mass affordably would come through unmanned aircraft, and in this case, they would fulfill a role that would be complementary to the fighters. They would fly fast, maybe not as long. They would perform roles similar to what a fighter performs. There, I think the mix is going to last for a long, long time. So I think when you think of the unmanned aircraft, it's important also to consider it a system and not just a platform. Going into these contested areas, a really, really contested area, is going to require integration of let's say, larger long endurance platforms with smaller attritable platforms that can get into an air defense environment and maybe do things like stand-in jamming and enable the takedown of or at least the suppression of that air defense environment to allow the other parts of air power to come to bear.
It's we don't have time here, but it's the whole issue of electronic warfare has been just transformed by this war.
Yeah, absolutely,
I mean,
absolutely.
It's unbelievable.
And the refresh time and the update time is orders of magnitude ahead of what an acquisition community would be used to. Orders of magnitude.
Yeah, we call them old crows for a reason. I mean, it just takes forever to get old EW systems to be upgraded, and now we're doing it in days, on the field.
Absolutely, yes. That is one of the other great learnings, is not just the environment's tough, but that when you find a way to defeat it, that will last for maybe a few weeks.
Yeah.
Before
That's right.
The other side figures that out, and you got to be ahead of them.
We're at our time. This has been a fascinating conversation. Lyndon, thank you for giving us insights both into the mission area that General Atomics has pioneered, but also as a businessman and what it's like to work with our government. It is frustrating, but we do have high quality systems that are in the field. And
Absolutely.
so we have to figure out how we're going to strike a balance and make it more efficient. So let me just say thank you. We're delighted to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much.